Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Night's Narrative. It's so good to be with you tonight. We have a really interesting show. I know it's going to sound boring to say Bitcoin, but it isn't boring. It's going to be fascinating. Maybe that's why they called it Bitcoin, because they wanted it to be so hard to report on. But we're going to tell you all about it in a new and interesting way. So stick around for the next hour and maybe a little bit longer, and we'll tell you all about it. Noel Kassler is with me tonight. How are you doing, Noel?
Excellent, Zev. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Dave Troy, who's a researcher in the field of extremism, but also a systems analyst, is with us here. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Zev.
It's great to have you on. And Troy Esquivel, who you've not met before, because I believe he's new to all things on TV. He is a Bitcoin purchaser, an early purchaser of Bitcoin. He's going to tell us what it's like to be inside that Bitcoin world and what he's found since he joined there. How are you doing, Troy?
I'm doing great, Zev. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I was going to do a whole spiel off the top, but before I get into that, and maybe I won't even get to it at all, April the 14th, tomorrow, is meant to be a really big day. And for legitimate reasons, because a company called Coinbase is getting its IPO, but also potentially for non-legitimate reasons or more nefarious reasons. And maybe, Dave, you can explain why April the 14th is such an important day in this Bitcoin history.
Well, so there's a few things going on that are sort of interesting. And again, this is all in the realm of things that are interesting and worth keeping an eye on. We don't necessarily have a lot of hard intelligence that suggests, some kind of imminent craziness to go down. But at the same time, there's some weird signals. So the first thing is, as you mentioned, Coinbase is going to be going public. And Coinbase is a very large, probably one of the largest, if not the largest, cryptocurrency exchanges. So a lot of people buy and sell Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies through it. And so there's a lot of thinking that says that because it's going public and it's probably going to have like an IPO spike, and I think they're doing like direct share offering, something like that, it really legitimizes the entire crypto space because you've got this major company that's going to be coming online that's, kind of representative of the whole movement. But then beyond that, what we've been picking up on in some of the chatter online is that there's a couple of financial analysts connected with a group called Agora Publishing, based in Baltimore, my hometown, that has been talking about a $5.1 trillion financial extinction event that's going to happen on April 14th. And color me skeptical, it's March 4th, there's been all these dates over time that have been these bellwether things that are supposed to lead to various kinds of outcomes. But the notion that happens to also be the same date as Coinbase's IPO, and that a lot of people are speculating that cryptocurrencies will get chilled quite a bit as a result of that IPO. And we actually saw, Bitcoin rise a bit today to some pretty all-time high levels, but also the rise of Ethereum. And Tesla stock, which for weird reasons that nobody fully understands, seems to track very closely with crypto activity, something having to do with Elon Musk. That's kind of weird. So keep your eyes open. It's kind of a strange scenario.
It's interesting. The 5.1 trillion figure is quite specific. What is that referring to?
I assume it's referring to some, overall capitalization of a couple of different markets combined. Probably talking about equities markets.
Yeah,
but
it could also be the amount of investment into. I mean, there's the $3 trillion capital spend or whatever it is, infrastructure fund that they're doing, and $2 trillion went into COVID relief. That's 5 trillion. So maybe there's something there. Who knows?
The entire Bitcoin capitalization is something like 1.3 trillion right now. So, this is your traditional kind of financial newsletter snake oil. I don't put a lot of stock in it, but what I am alarmed by is the convergence of these kinds of financial newsletter types with the people that were involved with January 6th. There's quite a lot of overlap there, and we can get into more of that later. But that to me is where this becomes interesting. Not so much this financial, newsletter snake oil.
I mean, there's been snake oil salesmen throughout history selling all sorts of different things, and
promising apocalypses on different dates,
and the closest we've come to anything that looked anything real was January 6th, but even that wasn't successful per se. So it could just be a lot of fear mongering, but it's worth keeping an eye on, as you point out. Nevertheless, this bigger picture of what's going on with Bitcoin and also the attempt by Russia and China to, overtake or dethrone the dollar is also going on in the background of all of this, and has obviously implications on Bitcoin and U.S. hegemony across the world. But before we get into all of that, I think, Troy, it's fascinating that you got into the world of Bitcoin because you wanted to get out of being sort of stuck in a job, right? And stuck in a job you didn't like. And tell us the story. Tell us what happened after that. You got into Bitcoin, and then how did you get to sort of awakening?
Well, like we're talking about yesterday, I think it started around 2016. It had nothing to do with the specific job I was doing. I was in middle management. I was about 10 years in and staring down, another 30 or so. So back then, I think I was on, a lot of social media at Facebook, an early adopter of a lot of those platforms before, knowing what we know now. So I was very subject to that influence, and I was on Reddit a lot. And that was a theme, that comes up a lot with this generation that, and we've seen it in the last couple of years when you see OK Boomer, it's, it's kind of transferring the problems that we're having now economically onto the previous generation. And you can argue about the merits of that, that could be a show in of itself. But what it really is about is channeling that anxiety that a lot of people of my generation have of, not having the opportunities that they thought they would, whether it be, they didn't get to go to college, or they did go to college and it didn't guarantee them, a future, so to speak. So a lot of this is, a lot of that was specifically referencing 2008, and that's what we're seeing now. And it's not a coincidence that the Genesis block was created, which is the first, Bitcoin transaction, was January 2009. A few months after Lehman Brothers collapsed. And that was specifically if you go back to Satoshi Nakamoto, and we'll talk about him later, or her, or them. We don't really know. And it's fun to speculate.
Founder, right? Just to make sure everyone understands who this is. The person is
Correct.
supposedly...
The pseudonymous person who started this whole thing going. Yeah. It's decentralized, so there's no one's in charge. So it was a... sorry, I kind of got on a tangent. But this is all what informed my investment decision.
So
I guess, I bought into a lot of that externalizing, it's the banker's fault. It's the boomers' fault because they took everything when it was cheap and there's nothing left for us. There was some of that, but at the same time, my parents, were benefiters of that system, and they don't, if I ask them, like, oh, what's your best financial advice? It's like, we got lucky. Like, we lived in Southern California and we buy a house and it's worth twice as much in 10 years. Like, it's not natural. And that's why I, even as an investor, who's someone who benefits from the price increasing, that's exciting, but it's also kind of scary because it's not, whatever it is, it's not organic, or at least it doesn't feel that way. And that's what's setting off the alarm bells. And that's what Dave was getting at in his threads and in that 7-part piece.
When did you first buy a Bitcoin? When was the first purchase?
The end of the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017. So this is right as we're getting to like $1,000. I think the price was coming up, and that was a big deal because until that time, I think it kind of peaked in 2014 to 1,000. It went back down very quickly. But at this time, this was an all-time high. And the first time it had crested 1,000. And this was a lot of the buzz was going on. Same now. It's just another order of magnitude larger. When they hit 1,000, it was a big deal.
What is it worth today?
When they hit 20,000, it was a big deal.
63,000. Wow.
And on the eve of Coinbase's IPO and this, whatever this.
So if you bought that same Bitcoin,
here is,
if you still had it today, I don't know if you do, but if you still had it today, it would be worth $63,000. That same Bitcoin, or would it be worth more?
Correct.
Yeah, but
and what's important to point out is when you buy them on exchanges like Coinbase or Kraken, or there's a lot of them, but Coinbase is the first one to go public, and that's what all the buzz is about. So Coinbase is what I used, and when you set up an account as a normal user, there are limits. Just like anywhere else that you use financially, like you're limited to $500 a day or $1,000 a week or something. So it was something I didn't have any choice but to get into slowly, which is, I think, good. It's not like the uninhibited, no breaks Robinhood type of, buying stocks without any checks. So it was, you don't have to buy one Bitcoin. There are 21 million total. You can buy any fraction of, down to
Right.
like, you can buy a tenth, which would be zero point 0.1. You could buy a hundredth, which would be 0.01.
Right.
And those are just, you could use a calculator real quick and find out what that's worth. So as I was buying, the price was going up, and that fed the, the need, or what I felt was a need to keep buying more. So as much as I could, I got through 2017, I think the value got all the way up to like $19,000 by the end of the year.
Wow.
So that was just a huge year, and it stayed, that 20 was kind of the peak. And then from here until, it's interesting because the price started going up around December of last year. But it kind of bottomed back out. And I did what you're supposed to do. Is it's a long-term investment. It's a speculative investment, and you're not really supposed to look or think about it. You're just supposed to put it aside like you are, just like when you buy stocks on the S&P. You're not looking for a 2-year gain. You're not looking for a 6-month gain. It kind of seems different if you watch MSNBC and CNBC now, or whatever you get your financial information from. It's all about what's hot right now. It used to be about long-term investing and you getting a share of that profit in that company that you invest in. And now it's just something totally different. So I was, all part of all that hysteria, and that was great.
So when did you quit your
just
job?
follow the rules. I quit my job in 2017.
And then you
June.
started raising your kids at home. You sort of became a stay-at-home dad, right?
Yeah, we had our first kid in March 2017, which kind of was the first time I started, looking at investing or doing anything serious, because it's now like, okay, there's now stakeholders in me now, so I got to make responsible decisions. And part of that is when you invest in Bitcoin, you're not supposed to mortgage your house and go buy all the Bitcoin. Even if you did, you'd be doing well right now.
Yeah.
But it's still not in any universe by any financial professional a good idea. So you only supposed to put in what you can afford to lose. So whatever it is now, it's real, it's good, it's valuable, but it's also in concept. I don't have it. It's not cash I can go take to a store.
Right.
I can't spend it today. I can't buy anything with it. I could buy a Tesla with it, which would be something else we could talk about. I'm not going to buy a Tesla with it. You'd have to take it back to the exchange essentially to get money for it. The opposite of what you do, and that's their business. That's Coinbase. So at some time I could choose to do that, but until I do, the price could go to 75,000 tomorrow. It could go to 1,000, by the end of the year, or whenever. We're starting to see what's getting people excited now is institutions getting in, and not just big whales, investors buying personally for them, but like Dave was talking about, they are finding a way to tie the value of Bitcoin to these companies like Tesla and MicroStrategy. So the idea, in short, very simply, if Tesla is not making a lot of money on cars, or they are, or they not, I don't know their financial statements. I know they got a lot of fans. My brother has one. I'm not saying they're not great cars, but if they want to get their earnings up, then if they're holding Bitcoin, they found if they can buy Bitcoin, they can put it on their books, and all of a sudden it's appreciated 200-300%. And now they've actually made a profit for a quarter, not from selling cars, but from just owning stake in this thing that few understand, as they say. And I think it'd be better if everybody understood more about it. I'm not saying go and buy it. I'm not saying go and sell it. I'm just saying it should be
learn more about
understood.
it.
And the
Needs
things
more
that Dave
sunlight.
is talking
Yeah.
about need to be more understood.
You said yesterday that you had a sense of this community having changed a lot, that there's a different feeling in that community than there was at the start of Bitcoin. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about how you sense that community has changed?
Yeah, there's the online community, and then there's real life. And a lot of us have been missing out on real life for over a year now, and that's unfortunate. But you have to take on the internet as face value, because there are there are people genuinely interested. There are evangelists that want to tell everybody, hey, this is the path to financial freedom. This is the path to, short circuiting the banksters who are rigging everything against us. I'm not the kind of person who is ever going to advocate for a bank or a banker, but the system was saved in 2008 for a reason. It wasn't because we all are beholden to the banks and we had to and we were forced to at gunpoint. It's the alternative was a disaster that no one could, even the smartest people in our government can't. And I'm going to get burned for that one. The smartest people in our society couldn't conceive of, and literally anything was better than what would have happened if we didn't have a way to assess value and exchange between people in our world. It was a near miss. And now, Dave is getting at, I think people are taking advantage of it and taking
Do you think it's
hype.
been infiltrated by people that have got a bad agenda or trying to misuse the community? Or do you think that the community itself has just transformed into sort of zealots around this because they wanted to keep going up? They want the price to keep going up?
Yes, to both.
Both. Okay.
If I'm like anybody else, including myself, you're different in person, I think, than you are online to a varying extent. It's two different platforms, it's two different ways, but it used to be 100% in-person interaction, and now it's some weird blend. So in person, they just they have every reason to be excited. It's a self fulfilling. I mean, we talked about kind of similarities between the zeal of the internet propagandists that we've been seeing for the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years, and these people, but they are now stakeholders. It's like you have given them. It's like giving shares in the IRA, in the Internet Research Agency.
Right.
You are now financially incentivized to go out and
Destroy
sell
democracy.
this thing to people, to tell them how great it is, to tell them how it will free them. And you get every flavor, every brand of, it's God. It's from God. It's the way it should be. It's freeing people, the money changers, and giving everybody an equal shot. And that's something the libertarians have been pushing for generations. And it's always one version of some utopia that's always great on paper, but no one, bothers doing the math and what does that actually look like. And
Yeah,
the people
absolutely.
pushing this don't care what it looks like because they're the ones with, holding the Bitcoins. And it went from, and it's hard to disagree, even the pro Bitcoin people or the people that might disagree with what I'm saying. It's hard to argue that there hasn't been a shift from early on, when I was buying it. It's like, hey, this is a positive thing. We need to tell more people about this and get more people on board. To now it's like, all right, have fun staying poor. You don't
Right.
get it. I get it.
Right.
I'm in the in group. You're in the out group. Haha. And where have we seen that before? It's like,
Right. It's like
you know what I mean?
a capital racism almost. It's a
Yeah.
classism or whatever you call it.
cultish.
Dave, jump in here because I'm sure this speaks a lot to what you're talking about in terms of how this Agora group began and how it's injected itself into this discourse and how the community has changed. This Bitcoin community is almost radicalized.
Yeah, and I should also disclose that I own a tiny bit of Bitcoin. I actually own 0.1 Bitcoin, which has gone from $50 when I bought it up to $6,000 now.
Pretty good.
So that's been okay. But I also own some Dogecoin. My son was interested in cryptocurrencies back in 2013, 2014, and we set up a bunch of old PCs and stuff to mine Dogecoins. So we ended up with 3,000 Dogecoins, which we thought was just sort of fun, and now that's worth $2,400 or something.
Wow.
So it's ridiculous, and I don't personally have anything really against the idea of the technology sort of as a alternative investment and something like that. I think there are some ridiculous things going on regarding energy use, and the design of Bitcoin isn't very efficient for currency, but there are other designs that address that issue. Bitcoin Cash and some of the other
Right.
crypto assets work better in that regard. So I think it's an interesting innovation space, and I'm a technologist kind of at heart, so I don't decry people playing around with different alternatives. What I object to is the idea that what Bitcoin represents and what Troy was talking about with respect to kind of how cultish this has become is that it's really an attempt to enshrine in code libertarian values. And to kind of bring people into libertarianism by getting access to their money. And I think that in a democracy and in Western democracies generally, that's the kind of thing we should have a public debate about. We should have some conversation about how it's going to work. And I think governments have a role to play in protecting people who get involved in assets, like people that lose their, access to their Bitcoin wallets or SOL. And is that okay? That's, what if grandma loses access to her Bitcoin wallet? She invests in Bitcoin at age 32 as a spry young woman, and then by age 65 can't find her password. There's a lot
ridiculous that you can't access it if you can't remember your password. It's
these are the kinds of things. Obviously, there's wallet services that can help mitigate a lot of that. There's technical solutions to these problems, but at the same time, so much of what is being done with cryptocurrency is being done by, kind of hardline libertarian young males, and hardline libertarian young males have a certain view of the world. And, I don't know if that's the exact world that I want to be exactly governed by,
right.
So I feel like that's kind of something we should have a conversation about. And what, you mentioned with respect to Agora and these folks, this outfit called Agora Publishing was founded in about 1978, 79 by a guy named Bill Bonner and this other guy, James Dale Davidson. And it's this financial publishing newsletter company that puts out stock tips basically, but they have a dozen or more different, probably 20 or something different outlets that they publish under. So there's different brands for different audiences, and each one has their own kind of paranoid focus of the world and what's going to happen and what they care about. And some people are gold bugs, and other people are into crypto, and other people are looking for these kinds of stocks, and other people are looking for stocks that are recovering, that had been bad but are now good. And so these folks are basically selling tips and information, which kind of puts them in a right position for insider trading and corruption also. And there's been some accusations that they have, traded in information that they shouldn't have, and people have been burned by it and what have you. And there was an Unsolved Mysteries episode about this guy, Ray Rivera, that died mysteriously and left this really weird note that may or may not have been a suicide note that references the Freemasons and Bill Bonner and his guy Porter Stansberry and all this. But anyway, these guys are mixed up in this stuff, and they're all connected in with the same network of CNP people that were connected with January 6th. And the fact that they're shouting about April 14th is just kind of weird. And they share this kind of really hardcore libertarian philosophy that we see exhibited by Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, sort of the PayPal mafia network.
That's an interesting group of people.
Yeah, and I have to say that I have some personal affiliations with people from that network, and I don't find them all to be entirely objectionable. But I think that it's the covert nature of the idea that you're gonna somehow or another bring the country or the world to this solution that they don't know that they need and do it without their consent. It's just not honest, and it's not fundamentally, I think, good for people to do that without their full knowledge and debate in a public sphere around what happens. And the concern that I have right now is that just like with January 6th, where a bunch of people conspired behind closed doors to create a situation that was deadly, people died, to try to somehow or another usurp the power of the U.S. government and to affect some kind of vague, alternate outcome. That's just fundamentally anti-democratic. It's anti-Western values. It's just anti-everything that I think this country is based on. And the fact that they're trying some similar kinds of plays, and this comes from the Koch network. If you're familiar with Nancy MacLean's book called Democracy in Chains, she talks about how the Koch brothers worked with an economist named James Buchanan at George Mason University to basically come up with a series of what she calls interrelated plays that allow for the kind of transition into this kind of hardcore libertarian economy without people kind of catching on to it.
Right.
So they'll kind of like introduce, it's like baby steps, and little tiny bites of things that get you in that direction. But maybe, you're not kind of telling the patient like, okay, we're going to do this to you. It just kind of happens over time. So here you can see the Koch brothers, or at least Charles Koch now, since David is dead, but Koch Industries promoting a talk by Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, or as we like to call them, the Winklevi. And, they're promoting Bitcoin and whatnot here, which, fine, whatever, like they have the right to do that. But if you notice the last part of what they're saying there, the power of network effects and a decentralized future. So let's unpack that a little bit. Network effects means at some point, there's going to be enough people on these kinds of cryptocurrencies to cause a rapid transformation from kind of the way we have been doing things, which involves banks, credit cards, fiat currency, that kind of thing, to, quote, a decentralized future, which is code for blockchain and Bitcoin and all of that, which, okay, like that could be part of our future, sure. And in fact, there are cryptocurrency solutions in the works from China and from the Europe, the EU bloc. And we could do that in the US too, although regulators here have said there's really no reason to. And I kind of disagree with that. But at the same time, that's where we're at. And so the question is, like, do we want a decentralized future? And what does that mean? And, excuse me, like, what are we doing after dinner? Like it's kind of like being taken home without consent, And I think that it's time that we talk about that. So
yeah, and I think that's the moment in history that we're having right now is really we've gone from Bitcoin being a place where you could do some illicit things, basically you could buy drugs online or whatever you want without sort of getting tracked, even though you could, to now it's sort of demanding respectability in a way that's kind of untested, surely, but also maybe not the right thing for everybody. And it's trying to firstly become a real currency that you could buy houses and whatever with. And that gives it a legitimacy equivalent to the dollar or any other currency. But then there's also this background thing that's going on of the Russians and the Chinese trying to dislodge the American dollar from dominance in the world, and that is tied into Bitcoin, although they won't necessarily admit to it. We will get to that even more again a little bit later on. But I know, Noel, you're very interested in one piece of this which doesn't get a lot of attention, but it seems so fundamental to me. It's so environmentally unfriendly. Bitcoin is so unfriendly to the environment. It chugs up so much energy. And it's not really the Bitcoin itself, it's the blockchain, as Troy can explain to us a little later on. But it's not very efficient. And that makes it kind of crazy that we were going to try to transfer our existence, or these guys are trying to transfer our economic system onto a platform that basically hurts the environment.
Absolutely. And, I remember I used to do this folk festival called the Clearwater Festival, which is in the Hudson Valley of New York. It was founded by Pete Seeger. It's one of the nation's oldest, environmental music festivals, all these folk singers and stuff. And I was there in 2017, and I'm in catering with these folk singers, getting my food. And this person next to me is like, I'll tell you what, man, it's all about Bitcoin for me now. I'm just buying all this Bitcoin I can get, and I'm going to get a house and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, do you know why we're here? Do you understand what Bitcoin does? And clearly this guy didn't. He's like, yeah, it's a non-fiat currency and I'm not going to be a slave to a bank, man. He thought he was doing this sort of hippie new age kind of banking. And, what confuses me and many people is, Bitcoin there's only 21 million Bitcoin ever created to sort of, and I'm using layman's terms, there's been 18.6 million Bitcoins sold as of last summer, right? And they have to be verified by this blockchain computer processing, which requires a ton of electricity to run all these servers to make these equations that sort of do the work of verifying this, this currency that you have, this Bitcoin, that it exists. The question and fear I have is, and this is, all these guys can correct me, but so there's 2.3 million Bitcoins left, and it's going to be another 120 years until those are all mined. So in the last 10 years, 18 million Bitcoins, 18.6 million have been taken care of. But now we got to run these computers for 120 years, to certify the rest of this. And I'm just, as again, layman trying to explain it, but that's crazy. It's crazy that Elon Musk is now like, hey, you can buy a Tesla with Bitcoin. Okay, so I can buy an electric car to help the environment, with a form of currency that's going to destroy the environment. Why I like banks personally. I'm happy to have money in the bank,
Oh, yeah.
And if I do have any money, I like Dave said, like, FDIC exists for a reason. What if there's a run on the banks? What if your grandma gets locked out? I know celebrities who bought NFTs in the last month that have went to log in and it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And they're like, dude, I just bought a Pokemon for 50 grand and it's gone. It's like, no shit, go buy a painting. But I put my money in old guitars. I'm old fashioned. Like, I want a piece of art or something, or I want that money in a blue chip stock somewhere. But and I get the idea for this new technology and for like Troy said and like Dave said, a new way of doing things. But you have to be aware of what the whole picture is. And I think Dave made an excellent point. People don't realize they're being indoctrinated into a philosophy. And I see that when I speak out on Twitter about this. I'll try to make a joke and explain it to people, the difference between fiat currency. I said, that's like an old school smoking a joint, and Bitcoin's like this vaping and all this stuff that people do. And when I'll explain that, I'll get attacked by people with the Bitcoin symbol in their thing. And they all have the same language. It's like, you want to be a slave to the banks. You don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're sitting there in front of your Game Boy, bro. You know what I mean? I'll figure it out, buy some property. It's like, I won't go on a rant about it, but what I've seen and experienced regarding this in real life, I hear in what these gentlemen are saying. And it is scary and it needs sunlight. It needs explanations because it's confusing stuff for
People
anyone,
don't know.
Right.
Yeah, but it's
Does that
unsustainable.
reaction,
It doesn't seem
Noel,
sustainable.
does that reaction remind you of anything? Is that familiar at all to anything you've experienced in the last couple of years?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And
It's
that's
cultish,
Right. That's Donald Trump. That's anybody I'm going to put a symbol of my allegiance to this person or this concept in my communication field on the outside world. That alone is scary. That alone.
That was the power of network effects, like he was pointing out in the thing there. Do you remember the name Cameron Ortis? Does that ring a bell? He was the RCMP, the very high level RCMP officer that was arrested for espionage.
Oh, yeah.
He was selling secrets, I believe, to the Chinese.
Right.
Forgive me if I got that wrong, but I'm pretty
I
sure
think
that's
you're
a safe guess.
Yeah. Yeah,
And that was a big deal, and it should be a big deal, and I'm sure they're going to adjudicate that properly. But one of the things, if you go back in his resume and look at, he was studying network effects and things like that since 2008, 2009. So that is, that's the new power. We've seen what that could do, how that could mobilize people, and that was personified. That was, what they call cyber to physical. That was no longer a theoretical information attack. That was real bad shit that happened to our country on January 6th by real people that were driven by ideology. Now you're tokenizing that. It's not just the ideology. It's now they've been reinforced. Noel, you think that guy was enthusiastic before? If you could talk to that guy right now, you still, not only can you not get him off that pedestal, hey man, cash out and buy something that's real. No, man, this thing's going to the moon. Have you not been paying attention? I've got laser eyes here. You must love banks. Okay, man.
Exactly.
Well, the laser eyes and the Bitcoin symbols, all that stuff is that kind of cultish symbols that, help to reinforce kind of the social capital between this network of people. And over time, that kind of stuff builds up and it becomes part of the kind of mimetic power of being able to kind of drive this kind of messaging. So, for instance, if Elon Musk wakes up tomorrow morning, which he may well, and say, everybody has to do X, there's going to be a lot of people doing X, and they're going to make memes about it, and they're going to put things in their profiles, and and that's the issue, is that people are generating leverage, financial leverage, through and ideological leverage through memetics. And when you combine memetics and finance and government into one sticky web, you have a powerful machine for manipulating society as a whole without government consent and without consent of the ruled, if you will.
That's a good point. I'm going to stop there for a second. We're going to take a break. On the other side of this, we will get into Russia, China, and Bitcoin and how they're potentially attempting to dethrone the dollar and tank the U.S. economy. We'll be right back. I was away for a couple of days for the first time in over a year. It was such a good opportunity to be on the road, and it felt so good. It also gave me a chance to catch up on no less than 8 books in one 2-hour drive. And that's because I was using this incredible app called Blinkist. It's hard to find the time to sit down and read and learn more. So when you don't have that free time, you can't read or work on your personal development. That's really annoying. Blinkist is really unique, and it works on your phone, your tablet, or your web browser. Blinkist takes the best key takeaways, the need-to-know information from thousands of nonfiction books and condenses them down to just 15 minutes each that you can read or listen to. Right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/reach. Try it free for 7 days and save 25% off your new subscription. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist. Blinkist.com/reach to start your free 7-day trial. And you'll also save 25% off, but only when you go and sign up right now at Blinkist.com/reach. Let's get into this big thing. Let's get into Russia and China and figure out whether this has anything to do with Bitcoin or not. It's interesting to me that the biggest countries in the world that are currently engaged in the sale and use of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, the United States isn't even the top 5 countries there. Really, it's Ukraine. Let me pull up a chart here so you get to follow along. Where it is, here you go. It's I can't read that, but it's Ukraine, Russia basically as the top 2, then it's Venezuela, then it's China, and then it's, I think, Kenya over there. So it's fascinating to me that those are the countries. Ukraine and Russia are basically, from my experience in covering Trump-Russia, they're basically the same country, especially the eastern part of Ukraine. They operate in very similar ways in terms of their mafia is shared, their mob is shared, and that's very important because my first time experiencing the story of Bitcoin or writing about Bitcoin came in 2017 when the Mt. Gox exchange collapsed. And it came to me then that there seems a real possibility that these collapses were not just happening organically. They were likely happening because the Russian leaders or the Russian mafia, whichever you want to call them, was using these exchanges to siphon billions of dollars, billions of rubles probably, out of Russia into dollars, and basically using these Bitcoin exchanges as money laundering vehicles. And that is why when Mt. Gox went down, Vladimir Putin was quoted as saying that he was described as being mad as hell about it. I mean, why would Vladimir Putin care about a Bitcoin exchange? He cares about it because probably it was housing a lot of his assets, or at least was using it to move assets from Russia to the rest of the world. So it's a shady place, Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency has been a shady place all along. It's been run by organized crime. It's been run by people like Vladimir Putin or other, leaders who have autocratic tendencies. This is how money gets funneled out of those countries into the West. And now we're being asked to, adopt it and bless it here in America. And I want to get your take, any of you, but why don't we start with you, Dave, about what you think about that piece of it. Are we just allowing organized crime from Russia backdoor entry into our system by allowing them to use the system for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple different factors that are kind of sort of converging to create multiple different effects at the same time. So, on the one hand, you have what we could call like the financial underworld that has taken a bit of a shine to Bitcoin. A lot of people, I think, overstate the fact that like it's primarily used for that kind of activity. I don't know if that's true any longer. There was a new report that came out last week. It was produced by a firm called Chainalysis that kind of makes the statement that there's hardly any fraud or illicit activity on Bitcoin. I think that's also an overstatement. The truth is somewhere in between. There's a lot of legitimate use, and then there's a lot of shady stuff going on as well. But sort of a narrative of like Russian oligarch interests using it, I think is valid. There's, we've seen some evidence of like political operatives being paid off with Bitcoin in exchange for participation in operations like January 6th or information ops, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a playground for that kind of stuff. But at the same time, when you talk about Russia and China have recently announced that they are going to partner to try to fight, the dollar's hegemony and kind of erode U.S. dominance with respect to the dollar. And there's only so much that they can kind of do on that strictly on their own without the input of, say, like other actors. So, on the one hand, they may want to do that, but in order for that to work, China is going to have to basically reduce its reliance on dollars for things like its Belt and Road Initiative. And, so everything's interconnected, everything's interlocked. You can't just kind of decide to wage unilateral war on the dollar and still expect to get stuff done in the world. You kind of have to do it in a measured way. So one strategy that I think that we may see as a way to erode confidence in the dollar, but particularly to erode confidence in the U.S. financial system, is to amplify any kinds of attacks that may occur in terms of driving people away from the traditional financial sector and the dollar into cryptocurrencies. And I think that that's something that this kind of January 6th linked network is in a position to do independently of Russia and China. And then Russia and China may decide to kind of pile on to such a thing. So say, for example, that Elon Musk and Kanye West and, Peter Thiel and a bunch of people decide to start shilling cryptocurrency and to start, raising questions about, let's say, the ratio of the S&P PE to like the GDP, which Elon Musk actually did just the other day.
This is your crowd.
Yeah,
These are your guys.
These are all buddies, so you got Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and Kanye West and Elon Musk. And, these guys all know each other and they're kind of giving each other tips. And I think, in some cases, coordinating their messaging. Mm-hmm. So, you kind of have to assume that those guys could decide to sync up at any time and launch an information attack that other kinds of large actors like state entities could latch onto. The other thing that we've seen...
Isn't that illegal, by the way? I mean, you'd think that running up stocks like that on false information would be illegal in the old world. It's not illegal in the Bitcoin world?
But there's no real regulation on the Bitcoin world. So Coinbase right now is regulated as a money transfer service, which, it is not regulated as a security. So there's real questions about whether people are buying Bitcoin on leverage, which in that case, they're basically getting margin type services. And while Coinbase itself doesn't provide those kinds of margin leverage services, they seem to be partnering with firms that do. So there's a lot of kind of funny money that's propping up the price of Bitcoin right now because people are borrowing money to buy it, right? So when have we seen this before? We saw this in 1929. We saw it in 1980 with this Hunt Brothers attempt to corner the silver market, where they were borrowing, a lot of people were borrowing money, buying silver using money that they had borrowed. So there was a rule put in place in early 1980 called Silver Rule 7 that prohibited the purchase of silver using leverage. Right. And so what that ended up doing was it pretty well crashed the price of silver after about 6 weeks. And we had the same thing happen in 1933 with gold, where because the New Deal needed to be put into place, a lot of kind of the gold bug types, the people that were really enamored with the gold standard and thought that printing of money by the government was the equivalent of theft, which you can get into a long argument about. They wanted to hoard gold. And so Roosevelt basically said, no, you can't do that. If you've got silver certificates, you got to turn them in by this date, or gold certificates. And so they prohibited the hoarding of gold. And the same thing had to be done in 1980 with the Hunt brothers. And so what my personal opinion is that the same kind of thing is playing out with crypto. And some people say, well, crypto is not the same because crypto is not tangible. Well, in practice, neither is gold at scale. Like nobody's going to be sitting on some giant pile of gold personally. It becomes an abstraction. So there's not a lot of difference between Bitcoin and gold. And the reason why that they're similar is because Bitcoin is an abstraction that you can actually keep track of. You can, assure continued long-term ownership of it, and it's scarce in its nature. So there's only so much Bitcoin to go around. So in that regard, it functions exactly as digital gold. And I think the difference between 1934 and 1980 and now is that we have not caught up to the fact that this same type of effort is being made to kind of corner this like goofy, commodity and, use it as a way to challenge the primacy of the dollar. And we haven't implemented a rule to prevent that right now. So I think we need to implement some kind of a reasonable precaution that says, look, if you're borrowing money to buy crypto, that's about to not be possible. And that, would have the effect of lowering the price of crypto and stabilizing things.
It would to some extent, yeah. But people have to declare that, and Coinbase would have to agree to do that. Well, have to be forced to do that. But it doesn't help the hysteria part of it. I mean, we're going to see an IPO tomorrow that's going to launch into a crazy way to the, how much is it going to be worth? Do we think maybe 100 million, maybe more? It's so much money, and that's going to create even more anticipation, more interest in Bitcoin, probably drive the price up more, and more hysteria. And then on top of that, you've got China and Russia China particularly introducing their yuan digital currency, which may not enter our marketplace until 2024 or whatever. But it's still the first time we've seen a government create a wallet that is going to allow the traditional money, the traditional yuan, next to the digital currency, and any Bitcoin, anything else you have in there. So it's them allowing a platform by the government of China to integrate and mix all these currencies with each other. I mean, that to me, looks like a move by China to get the dollar off the throne, or dethrone the dollar, and also create this kind of hysteria in order to create enough buzz to move more money into their renminbi or the ruble or whatever they want to try and move their money into. So I'm not being totally clear there, but it does feel to me like that there's a movement that is more than just one event that is happening coincidentally with another. They're all happening at the same time for a reason.
Well, and suppose that, the Coinbase thing goes bananas tomorrow and Bitcoin goes way up and Tether goes way up. Of course, a lot of people think that buying Tether is a pretty good way of manipulating the price of Bitcoin, because Tether is supposed to be tied to the dollar. So in theory, if you buy a ton of Tether, it could actually drive the price of Tether up, which in turn could drive the price of Bitcoin up. So there's easy ways to manipulate the market overall. And, if things go really crazy tomorrow and things seem like they're just going through the roof and everything is optimistic and everything is wonderful, suppose on, Thursday, Elon Musk tweets, like, haha, stonks, right? Yeah. And he basically makes fun of the traditional stock market and in favor of all of this Bitcoin shit. What'll happen is you'll end up with a bunch of people networked online saying things like, I'm fucking selling all my AAPL and my GOOG, and I'm going all in on Tesla and BTC and whatever else. Mm-hmm. And, you could see a really strong shift of assets coming about through the movement of crowds. And then you might say, well, shouldn't Elon Musk be strong up for market manipulation? But what did he do? He said stonks. Right. That ain't illegal. You can say stonks all you want. But him just doing that right after a successful Bitcoin day could have a really negative impact on the traditional financial market, which in turn, if you crash the stock market, that's not going to be great for the dollar,
No.
Right.
So,
Go ahead, Noel.
Well, I was just going to say, we got a little taste of that with sort of the meme stocks back in February, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that was mostly a test run, to be really honest.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a real threat to the market and the dollar in general. How do you think it'll work in the actual Bitcoin market, Troy? Do you think people are going to be funneling into that space? Are going to be moving their funds into it? Are they anticipating this kind of huge influx of money?
Yeah, that seems to be the trend, and like you said, what anyone who can is taking advantage of channeling all that hype and all that energy and getting the price of Coinbase and the price of BTC to kind of play off of each other, because each one legitimizes each other. Now it's gone from just the blockchain has nothing to do. This is a brand new financial system. It's brand new. Now it's gotten its claws into the stock market. Like it's on. It's going to be listed tomorrow, and it's already being traded over the counter. And I haven't even looked very closely, but I think it's up something like $400 or $500 a share now. Wow. So it's going to be, it reminds me of Facebook, because if you remember Facebook, it went public and it went down. We weren't talking about such large numbers, but I think it downloaded at 4 or debuted at 40 and went down to 32, like significant drops, because this is all, again, this is speculation on speculation, like that this is a new branch of the financial system, and this is the first big company to go public. This is like the equivalent of, the other. This is the dot-com boom all over again. These companies getting into this space and just, making up domains and everyone getting in. Well, who doesn't want to buy pets.com? Like that's on fire right now. And that was just a website that, you could still visit the archive version if you go to Wikipedia, and it's just a website that like your kid could do now. And it was nothing but, the speculation were there. Obviously this is different. This is, something that was, created in 2009 and now has withstood, the scrutiny and, whatever attacks could be mustered. If you think about, hackers and the concept of a honeypot, if someone wanted to mess with it, if someone wanted to start, compromising the system, they would have done it by now just to do it. Now there's a huge financial incentive to do so, and they haven't, and it hasn't happened yet. So it gives it legitimacy, and then influencers can inject legitimacy at any time, and timing is
But as you point
everything. Like you were saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Like you were saying earlier, the biggest thing keeping markets from being manipulated on the stock market is the laws that prevent insider trading. You can't have inside, and what that is inside information. If the ABC widget company is about to be bought by Facebook and their stock's going to go way up as soon as that information goes public, and you buy a stock in the ABC widget company knowing it's going to make you a bunch of money, then you're going to go to prison. And if you lie about it, you're going to go to prison for longer, because that would be very
And there
bad
really
for
is
the
nothing
entire
like
system.
this. There's nothing like this in the space. There's no
Bitcoin is not
regulation
regulated.
in
The
any way.
blockchain is not regulated, and the same things that are that are sold as the strengths are also what's keeping it on this inorganic path where it can be manipulated. There's no laws against coordinating large enough buys to make the price go up just because you're trying to time it the way you want to. I don't really have the elevator pitch on this work, but basically what I'm trying to say is there's nothing to stop, people from working together to game the system. And this is a system that the more money goes in, the market cap's $1 trillion now.
Yeah. Not just people, it could be states, could be organized criminal networks, could be anything. So, you're talking about, if you talk about all these networks we're talking about, the one that Dave's talking about, this sort of extremist CNP network that exists in the US, you talk about the network that might be the organized crime network out of Russia, or the Chinese and Russian now cooperation on this dollar hegemony fight. I mean, all of those could be pouring money in a coordinated way to achieve whatever result they want. And if they wanted to, potentially they could tank the market. I mean, you'd think they could if there's that much money pouring in, they might be able to one day tank the market.
I think if they kind of keep wobbling it, it's kind of like a big piece of furniture. If you keep kind of getting it going and do it again and again, eventually you can kind of have that effect. And I would also point out that coordination that they may undertake need not be strictly, direct coordination or hierarchical in any way.
Yeah.
All you have to do is put out a tweet that says game on, and a bunch of people that know what it means that the game is on can just act independently. And there's no way you can call that collusion or anything. It's just people doing stuff, So
and if the
it
market
doesn't have to work perfectly. It doesn't have to.
No, it just has to work
whatever
well
they
enough,
wanted to do on January 6th, they didn't. I mean, we got because of a lot of really brave people and a lot of luck. It wasn't worse than it was. So it didn't undermine our government. We got what we needed to do done that night, and we made a point to do it to show that you can't just come in with sharp elbows and impose your will on democracy. But now it's different. It's
the Wild West. I mean, you've got, there's no regulation here, and anything could happen. And it's if the stock market tanks, then it's still government that has to show up and and support your banks from not foreclosing on your homes or whatever. So government's still there carrying the can on this thing that they have no regulation over. And I know
somebody's got to take care of grandma.
Exactly.
That's the point.
And so Biden's
and every time they
aware
make
of this.
an attempt to undermine the financial system, even if the goal is to subvert the dollar entirely and replace it with Bitcoin, if they don't succeed, they still they've
I mean,
still done more to damage the reputation and the trust. And that's erosion of trust is one of the biggest themes that you could tie a thread through the last 5, 6, 7, all the way to 2008.
Hmm.
yeah.
Trust in institutions. If you can undermine it, you were successful, and you are now closer to being able to undermine it again and have people lose faith. And
It's an iterative process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just
So
actually thought
you don't
that's
have
why
to be
people need
perfectly
this
successful.
information.
I just thought of what that $5 trillion might be. I mean, say you've got $5 trillion that you have loaned, really. The American government has loaned $5 trillion to do the infrastructure thing and to do the COVID thing based on really low interest rates, right? Now imagine
Yeah,
the stock market
absolutely.
crashes because of a Bitcoin or a coordinated attack on the stock market. Suddenly interest rates are going to have to go up. Now you've got a $5 trillion problem. That could be it.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that some of these folks are realizing too that because of all of this extra stimulus money, that's so much of that money has gone directly into the stock market as well, and that's
exactly.
kind of another interesting point. Is that if you think about the people that started 2020 really rich, they ended 2020 much richer because people don't know what to do with this money. Like there was nothing to spend it on last year, so people just stuffed it in the stock market.
Right.
And so things are really overinflated. The dollar is overextended to a large extent. It's strong, but it's still, we've got a lot of them floating around out there, 5 trillion new ones. So, it feels like a pretty unstable moment. And, to the extent that you could inject energy that's destabilizing into the system, you could topple different things. And the results may not be predictable, but as you guys were saying, it doesn't necessarily it doesn't have to be a perfect thing. All you have to do is like create some damage and accelerate it to the next stage, so.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, and that damage ripples out. We're talking about theoretical things, but there's real world consequences. It's like Dave said, somebody's grandma loses their house, like that's the part that scares me, is the human suffering that can be like that happens. I saw it in 2008. I was touring the country.
Right.
I used to work with rock bands, and I'd go sit in front of my hotel in Houston, like a St. Regis or something, and there'd be somebody on a park bench next to me who was like, yeah, I had a job at Walmart and I got laid off in 2008, and then I lost my apartment, and now I live on this park bench. Like, not deranged homeless people, like people who the system didn't work for them. And like you guys just said, I'm in Westchester County. I'm in a town of like hedge fund guys, and there's a few famous billionaires here, people that did really well in the last year. And I go into the city every day, and like there's construction everywhere. There's new buildings going up everywhere. There's people at the high end of the real estate market buying these huge apartments all the time. And you look at the streets and every other store is closed. There's never been more people living in the streets. It's like Dave said, it doesn't look like a healthy moment. It may be an exciting moment. It may be overinflated with capital, and certain people are having a great time and trying to even figure out what to spend all this money on. But it doesn't look like a healthy, sustainable situation we're in. So anything that's going to spike those markets and add further volatility is terrifying to me, especially if it can be somebody like Elon Musk, who's clearly like a Batman villain in my mind, and I worked with Kanye. Like, if you don't want anything, he came and did a Sandy benefit I worked on after Hurricane Sandy, and I was the after coordinator, and I had to chase him around all night to just get him to sign his paperwork, and he never did, and left the building. And then we put out a film, and finally his manager told me, he's like, look, he's not signing it. We don't need the money. Screw it. But we couldn't release the movie with his performance in it make money. It was a charity.
Charity event. Oh, wow.
I was like, so trust me, that guy's out of his mind. Like, and you don't want him getting together, because somebody like Elon Musk could manipulate Kanye all day long. It's like Trump. You just flatter these guys, and you can get them to do whatever they want. So it's scary. It's just terrifying.
Yeah. It seems like the masters of the universe have sort of figured out that they can boom bust the market themselves and make a fortune off it. And then they don't have to worry about getting, jobs for everybody or feeding everybody. Right. It's just there's another way to earn a lot of money. It seems to be where we're at. Troy, what are your thoughts on all this?
It's non-linear warfare. It's taking advantage of weaknesses we have, vulnerabilities that are based on our Constitution. Like, these are what we founded. These are traditionally our strengths, our liberty and freedom. and they're selling these, cryptocurrencies as liberty and freedom, while completely ignoring that it's going to the end goal for everyone is to completely undermine what underwrites the U.S. government, the U.S. military, um, the concept of infrastructure. Like, they have either no idea, or they're being extremely disingenuous and holding back a lot of information. It's just like they sell themselves as the replacement to bankers and Wall Street, but they are now. I mean, tell me the difference. Like, the attire and now they're on computers and not terminals in a building.
Yeah.
But there was an acronym they would use back then, or I'm sure they still do use, IBG, YBG, the people that make the kind of legislation that repeals Glass-Steagall and takes rolls regulation back so that more money can be created and more opportunities can be created, which means that cut is still 99% to 1%, but it's more money, so they look good while they're doing it. And then 20 years later, you get the mortgage crisis, because those really bad mortgages were rebranded and resold as securities that could be traded and had some kind of value, when really they were just junk bonds dressed up
Right.
with a AAA grade from
Right.
someone that you were supposed to trust. So I can't think of another way where you could convince the citizens of a country to go and try and cash in all of their holdings in the companies that make us strong. I'm not a FANG, Facebook, Apple, Google, Netflix. I'm not a fan, but those are our biggest companies, and they do drive a lot of American innovation. And if we're going to, let our own people be manipulated into working against their own interests, that is, like Dave was saying, that's anti-democratic. We're not even able to make informed decisions to our own interests, because we've been just swarmed by propaganda and people activated by propaganda. And yeah, everyone has a right to do what they want, but that they also have a right to be fully informed. And I think you've all probably experienced at some point, the Bitcoin trolls, the laser eyes coming out and telling you all the reasons why you're bad and stupid and they're smart and cool. But every time they do, it should be seen as something unsettling. Like, there's no investment. If you're serious about investment, there's been no fanboying in the history of investment. Second to Bitcoin and Tesla, no one was wearing IBM shirts in the 70s. No one was like standing Apple.
Exactly.
Like, it just worked because they made good stuff.
Yeah.
And now it's completely warped. And I'm not saying we're too far gone, but we don't have the best information. So they shouldn't be worried about every single attack against their ideologies and against the blockchain and against Bitcoin, and every argument against it makes it stronger, because it either takes down Bitcoin and everybody comes to realize, oh, it's a scam and we got to sell Bitcoin to make it go back down to zero. Great. Then Bitcoin's been defeated. And why? Like, that's not going to happen. If you really believe in Bitcoin, if you're invested in Bitcoin, then you believe it is the future, and attacks and commentary shouldn't bother you. It gives you an opportunity to show up your weaknesses and make it this thing that can, last generations. Right now, it's 15 years old, less than 15 years old. It's, the US dollar is much older than that. It's been, what drives the world economy since World War II. And I have a lot more faith in that than a Bitcoin. Despite what's happening, it might be the hot thing right now, but everyone just needs to take a step back and realize how fast this is happening, and this information, and now it's information and money and the economy. It's a very big problem. I know we're like an hour and a half show here, but I mean, it deserves
we're getting a lot of time.
more time, and people have questions. And
yeah, we'd also do this. We could also do this again. But there's one thing I just want to pick up on, and then we can take questions if anyone's been following the feed. I haven't been doing it because I can't do it while I'm on the air. But the thing which bothers me or scares me the most is the American people have had this dollar to use as a way to force human rights, as a way to encourage human rights. Maybe this is a better term, as a instrument of foreign influence for over a century now. At least that's how we've used it the last century. once we lose that dominance, once we lose the American dollar's dominance as the currency that must be used for all major transactions in the world, and that's beginning to deteriorate, then it's a lot harder for us to do that. It's a lot harder for us to go anywhere in the world and say, hey, listen, you've got to be a lot more like us. You've got to protect women's rights or protect, or defeat racism or whatever it is you're trying to say. It's a lot harder to do that without the dollar at your back.
I might weigh in
Yeah,
on
what
that.
has Putin been saying?
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, what has been
No.
Putin saying since like the year 2000? Like since he was 4 feet tall when he was a little czar. He's been saying, that the whole problem with the world is U.S. It's a unipolar world now since the end of the Cold War, and there's no check and balance to the United States, and that has informed like almost all of the propaganda that gave way to the last 5 years. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah, and I might just say that, I think it's probably premature to predict the dollar's demise or its lack of influence. I think it is going to remain, the dominant, kind of mode of financial expression for a long time. The thing that I think that we do need to try to do, though, is recognize the potential threat that these kinds of alternative currencies combined with information operations pose to stability. And to perception also, to the extent that perception is reality, these folks are aiming to alter perception at scale. And if there's a growing perception that the dollar isn't as dominant, that other things are better and whatever, that does erode, U.S. power. And so in my opinion, the main cure here is to try to curb the ability of these kinds of information ops and for cryptocurrencies to potentially cause damage to the dollar's reputation and to the perception of the dollar. And I don't think that you're going to see the ruble or the renminbi, suddenly gain in, popularity relative to the dollar. But Bitcoin presents this kind of wild card for manipulation and for altering perception that I think people don't widely understand. And I think that that's what needs to be kind of how to put a cap in that. That needs to be slowed down, and if you can do that, then the dollar will continue to do its thing. The other thing that I think people have talked about is, should the U.S. come out with a federally backed thing that's done by the Fed, that's a cryptocurrency that would actually be useful as cash. And I think there's some arguments for that could be interesting. And I don't know that people in the Fed, kind of world agree with that right now. I know that they've been looking at it and that they've decided for now not to do anything. But in my opinion, it might be wise to say you're going to do something and kind of nurse it along, merely to remove the competition from non-state actors as being, kind of where the action is. Start to do something that detracts from non-state actors, because I think we do want to maintain that dollar dominance around the world. And a way to do that would be to participate more in cryptocurrencies. But, again, I'm not a real expert in this. I'm kind of making this up as I go along. And I think, as are a lot of people. So it's a conversation that we need to have as a country. And that's what concerns me the most, is that we're not really having an open or clear-headed conversation about that. Yeah,
it's happening so quickly. And once it happens, it's hard to turn back. All right, is anyone on the chat groups? I couldn't get on. So I don't know if any of you are seeing any of the questions there, but we're over time anyhow. But if we could squeeze in a couple of questions, that would be okay if anyone can see them. But if not, we can do another Q&A another time. Let's just say that's the show for tonight. You guys have been terrific. What an interesting conversation, which we're not having. I wish we could have more of it. And the thing that it seems to me so evident is that we need a lot of legislation. We need regulation in addition to also criminal legislation to figure out what crimes might be committed on this and how to avert that as well. So it's not just one piece of legislation we need. We need a lot to go in here to figure out exactly how we can control this. And I do think that over the next few months, it's going to be very hard for us to ignore what the Elon Musks of the world do. And on social media, I think that social media is going to be triggering a whole lot of economic activity. So even though you've got the Fed, the head of the Fed coming out yesterday saying the economy is blowing up and get ready for this, heated engine to bring back people to work, you're also going to have this other thing going on, which is Elon Musk and company manipulating the markets with Bitcoin. So all of that's going to play into how we come out of this pandemic and have an economic recovery. So thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us tonight. We haven't had 4 men on the show before. It's nice to do it, but we'll have LB and many other women back on the show on Friday for the after show. And thanks very much for joining us tonight on Narrative. Have a good night, everybody.
All right.
Thanks.
Good night, guys. Great job.
See you later.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Narrative is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. I was away for a couple of days for the first time in over a year. It was such a good opportunity to be on the road, and it felt so good. It also gave me a chance to catch up on no less than 8 books in one 2-hour drive. And that's because I was using this incredible app called Blinkist. It's hard to find the time to sit down and read and learn more. So when you don't have that free time, you can't read or work on your personal development. That's really annoying. Blinkist is really unique, and it works on your phone, your tablet, or your web browser. Blinkist takes the best key takeaways, the need-to-know information from thousands of nonfiction books and condenses them down to just 15 minutes each that you can read or listen to. Right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/reach. Try it free for 7 days and save 25% off your new subscription. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist. Blinkist.com/reach to start your free 7-day trial. And you'll also save 25% off, but only when you go and sign up right now at Blinkist.com/reach.